Good evening, everybody. I will not repeat the list of honorees and respected people. I just mentioned two of my former colleagues, ambassadors to the Holy See, Ambassador Lopez, Ambassador Lamdan. We worked together in the Foreign Ministry many years ago, and they were privileged to serve as our ambassadors to the Holy See. When I was asked to speak at this important gathering, I was wondering what could I say among experts, Catholic dignitaries, Israelis who deal with it. I said to myself I will speak as a Jew and an Israeli interested in Jewish history and the relations between the Jewish people and Christianity, as a son of a Holocaust survivor and as a public servant in Israel. We meet here in the Museum of the Jewish People, which is evidence to the complex history of the Jewish people in 2,000 years of diaspora. Israel, the ingathering of the exiles, the revival of the Hebrew language are in historical, maybe also theological terms, some kind of a miracle. My late father lost his family, parents, sisters, nephew, baby, many relatives, all shot into a mass grave in Belarus, in a little town where they lived in 1942. My wife's family was all sent from Warsaw to Treblinka and exterminated there. My late mother was sent in 1945 to Mauritius in the Indian Ocean by the British authorities to bring from there Jews who've been exiled by the British themselves when they were escaping the Holocaust early in World War II. My two parents fought in the War of Independence in 1948. And myself, as a civil servant, I worked, as was mentioned before, for many years in the efforts for peace with our neighbors. In 1987, as Cabinet Secretary, I suggested to Prime Minister Shamir that the government should monitor what's going on in anti-Semitic phenomena, feeling that 40 years after the Holocaust, the anti-Semitic monster raised its head again. There was no coordinated follow-up at the time, and an important minister, very important minister in our government, told me then, governments have to deal with the present and the future. Anti-Semitism is a matter of the past. That was his remark. Unfortunately, he was wrong, and the Foreign Ministry now has a whole department that deals with it, and so do other government and public bodies. The need is the reason. And at the time, we worked together with Professor Purat, with Dina, on dealing with these issues and monitoring them, and she's continuing here in the Cantor Center. This year is not only 50 years after Nostra Aetate, but also, of course, 70 years after the end of World War II. The blow the Jewish people received, losing a third of its members in those days, is in the collective DNA of all of us, Jews everywhere. As a young man, I read and was very impressed by the story of Nuntius Roncalli throughout the Holocaust, until he introduced the process that brought about Nostra Aetate as Pope John the 23rd. He was one of the lights, small lights, in a very dark period Not all the church, but much of the church was silent, and I will always remember, in many respects, the poem by Martin Niemöller on those who were silent. And then 20 years after the Holocaust came the Nostra Aetate, and it has a major significance, even though maybe the general public doesn't know much about it, in putting the relations between the church and the Jewish people on a new, updated theological basis, which to a great extent softens the former theological approach. And yet another generation went by, and in 1993, matter moved from the theological level to the diplomatic level by the fundamental agreement between the Holy See and the government of Israel, which includes appropriate cooperation in the fight against all kinds of anti-Semitic phenomena, racism, intolerance, and so on. 50 years went by, 22 years since the relations were established, and one can speak positively and express satisfaction on the development of the relationship between the Catholic Church, the State of Israel, the Jewish people. After 1965, already 3 popes visited here. I was myself privileged to accompany Prime Minister Rabin in 1994 when he visited in the Vatican Pope John Paul II. There are diplomatic representations. The dialogue is open. The Church is an interlocutor of Israel and of Jews in the Church's eyes and our eyes. So we saw a diplomatic, a theological change and a diplomatic evolution. And what next? Before that, let me say a word about the situation of Christianity in Israel and the Middle East. By our Declaration of Independence, Israel commits itself to the freedom of religion and to the preservation of the holy places of all religions. And usually and basically, it's there, and even diligently. I talk a lot about it with my friend and colleague, Justice Salim Jubran, a member of our Supreme Court, an Arab from the Maronite Catholic community who has pictures of popes in his chambers, and in the court he marks every year the season's holidays. One should condemn any aberration like the fire set to a church building in Tabqa, which is being dealt with by the enforcement authorities, and so it should. We should continue keeping faithfully the freedom of religion and the holy places. By the way, 2 years ago I chaired 3 conferences of judges from all religions that have religious courts in Israel, mainly for marriage and divorce, including church courts and religious and civil judges from the Jewish, the Muslim and Druze communities. It was a very, very moving dialogue and a moving experience, and I still have the good taste in my mouth. But one cannot but express a lot of concern about what's going on in our neighboring countries with ISIS, Daesh, and extremist Islam, and I'm especially underlining extreme Islam. We should not mix it with hundreds of millions of believers, Muslim believers, But the extreme Islam, its barbaric, murderous approach, attacks Christians and Christian churches in Arab countries around us, and the challenges for civilized humanity to defend and to fight against these terrible events. Coming back to Israel and the church and the Jewish people and the church, I was very moved by reading the new document of December 10 by the committee headed by Cardinal Koch, who we are privileged to host here. I'm not competent to interpret it theologically, but when you read the summary, every decent human being would subscribe to it. The call for mutual knowledge, the instilling of Nostra Aetatis approach to the education of young priests and to disseminate its spirit, the dialogue, the fight against anti-Semitism, underlining Pope Franciscus' so important words that a Christian cannot be anti-Semitic, in particular because of the Jewish roots of Christianity. In the Jewish tradition, Jacob and Esau in the book of Genesis were described in the beginning as Israel and the Edomites. Later, is the Jewish people and the Roman Empire. And later, Christianity and Judaism. And on the meeting between those two brothers, after a long separation, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who headed the Volozhin Yeshiva in Lithuania in the 19th century, interprets the meeting where it says that Esau kissed Jacob and they wept, the two of them, and he says, so this teaches us that Jacob in that meeting felt the sense of love to Esau. And this is for generations to come. When the seeds or the descendants of Esau wake up to understand and recognize the Jewish people, then we also wake up to recognize Esau as our brother. And this is the same message as we see in the declaration of December. In my view, and I'm about to finish, the challenge now, and this is the main message that should come out from this kind of a conference, is how to translate the 1965 Nostra Aetate, the 2015 document, in a way that will come to the knowledge of every priest in his church so that he could give the believers who come to pray the message in these documents. So here we come to a third step. After the theological, diplomatic, now we speak of the implementation of the practical matter, the struggle, the educational struggle, the religious struggle against anti-Semitism, together with political and legal and other ways of fighting anti-Semitism. Let's talk simply. Anti-Semitism is there from the beginning of history almost, and the fear is that the anti-Semitic devil is raising its head today. This is not just a mere fear. Nowadays, the international community is concentrated in the fight against ICIS or Daesh, but whoever looks at the wider picture sees that there's no doubt that the flame of anti-Semitism is there, and the data are collected by Cantor Center, by the American Jewish Committee, by many others. What will penetrate in the ears of the believers by their priests in the churches will influence their attitude, so the need for follow-up in the level of the local church is so important, and that is the importance, in my view, of this conference. Finally, I have the privilege and the honor to serve in the Supreme Court of the State of Israel, that sees human rights, the fight for human rights, the preservation of human rights as a central part of its work. Our former president, President Barak, who was himself a Holocaust survivor, said always that there are two lessons from the Holocaust. One, the need of a Jewish state so gates will be open for persecuted Jews. But the other main lesson is the preservation of human rights that the Nazis did not give us, that the Nazis took away from us. So it's the message of working together so that the fight for human rights for everybody, and I punctuate and I underline everybody, will also be combined with the fight against anti-Semitism, and here the Church has an important role. Thank you very much.